Hi, I'm Glenda Cedarleaf, and this is part 2 of Emily of New Moon. And this is the final segment. And tonight we begin with another of Emily's letters to her father. So I invite you to become comfortable in the ways that you know best, as we now continue with our final installment of this story. So let's begin. Dear Father, yesterday was my birthday. It will soon be a year since I came to New Moon. I feel as if I've always lived here. I've grown 2 inches. My birthday was so nice. Aunt Laura made a lovely cake and gave me a beautiful new white petticoat with an embroidered flounce. Aunt Laura gave me that piece of pink satin brocade in her bureau drawer. I have longed for it ever since I saw it, but I never hoped to possess it. Ilsa asked me what I meant to do with it, but I don't mean to do anything with it, only to keep it up here in the garret with my treasures and look at it, because it is beautiful. Aunt Elizabeth gave me a dictionary. That was a useful present. I feel I ought to like it. Hopefully you'll see an improvement in my spelling. Cousin Jimmy gave me a big, thick, blank book. I am so proud of it. It will be so nice to write pieces in. But I'll still use the letter bills to write to you, dear Father, because I can fold each one up by itself and addressed it like a real letter. Teddy gave me a picture of myself. He painted it in watercolors and called it The Smiling Girl. I look as if I was listening to something that made me very happy. Ilsa says it flatters me. It does make me better looking than I am. Teddy says he's going to paint a really big picture of me when he grows up. Perry walked all the way to Shrewsbury to get me a necklace of pearl beads, and then he lost it. Ilsa gave me a box of candy. I'm only going to eat 1 piece a day, so it'll last a long time. I wanted Ilsa to eat some, but she said she wouldn't, because it would be mean to help eat a present that you had given. And I insisted, and then we fought over it, and then Ilsa got so mad that she went home. But then she cooled off soon and came back for supper. Father, it's raining tonight, and it sounds like fairies' feet dancing over the garret roof. If it had not rained, Teddy was going to come down and help me look for the lost diamond. Wouldn't it be splendid if we could find it? Cousin Jimmy is fixing up the garden. He lets me help him, and I have a little flower bed of my own. I always run out first thing every morning to see how much the things have grown since yesterday. Spring is such a happifying time, isn't it? The little blue people are all out around the summer house. That's what Jimmy calls the violets, and I think it's lovely. He has names like that for all the flowers. The roses are the queens, and the June lilies are the snow ladies, and the tulips are the happy folk. The daffodils are the golden ones, and the china asters are my pink friends. In just a few weeks, I'm going to go to Wyther Grange to spend the rest of the summer with Aunt Nancy. You'll hear all about it in my letters. So the days of early summer flew by, and before she knew it, Emily was off to Wyther Grange to spend the rest of her days in the summer with Aunt Nancy. Wyther Grange was very beautiful. There, Emily was free to walk down to the bay shore all by herself. This was one of her most favorite things to do. She loved having that independence. One day, as she approached the water, she thought to herself, "I wonder how much longer I have to live." She had prowled that evening further down the shore than she had ever gone before. It was a warm, windy evening. The air was resinous and sweet. The bay was a misty turquoise. That part of the shore whereon she found herself seemed as lonely as if no human foot had ever trodden it, save for a tiny tricksy path, slender as red thread and bordered by great green velvety sheets of moss that wound in and out of the big firs and scrub spruces. The banks grew steeper and rockier as she went on, and finally the little path vanished altogether in a plot of bracken. Emily was just turning to go back when she caught sight of a magnificent spray of farewell summer growing far out on the edge of the bank. She must get it. She had never seen farewell summers of so dark and rich a purple. She stepped out to reach them. The treacherous mossy soil gave way under her feet and slid down the steep slope. Emily made a frantic attempt to scramble back, but the harder she tried, the faster went the landslide, carrying her with it. In a moment it would pass the slope and go over the brink of the rocks straight to the boulder-strewn shore 30 feet below. Emily had one dreadful moment of terror and despair, and then she found that the clump of mossy earth which had broken away had held on a narrow ledge of rock, half hanging over it, and she was lying on the clump. It seemed to her that the slightest movement on her part would send it over, straight to the cruel boulders underneath. She lay very still, trying to think, trying not to be afraid. She was far, far away from any house. Nobody could hear her if she screamed. And she didn't even dare to scream, lest the motion of her body could dislodge the fragment on which she lay. Aunt Nancy would grow anxious when the dark fell, and would send Caroline to look for her. But Caroline would never find her here. Nobody would ever think of looking here for her, so far away from the Grange, in the spruce barrens of the lower bay. To lie there alone all night, to fancy the earth was slipping over, waiting for help that would never come. Emily could hardly restrain a shudder that might have been ruinous. She had faced death once before, or thought she had, on the night when Lofty John had told her she had eaten a poisoned apple. But this was even harder. To die here, all alone, far away from home. They might never know what had become of her, never find her. She dramatized the thing so vividly that she almost screamed. She would just disappear from the world. No, I must be very brave and patient, she thought. My only chance is to lie still, and I can pray in my mind. I'm sure God can hear thoughts as well as words. It is nice to think He can hear me if nobody else can. Oh God, Father's God, please work a miracle and save my life, because I don't think I'm fit to die yet. Excuse my not being on my knees. You can see I can't move. And if I die, please don't let Aunt Elizabeth find my letter bills ever. Please let Aunt Laura find them. And please don't let Caroline move out of the wardrobe when she house cleans, because then she'd find my Jimmy book and read what I wrote about her. Please forgive all my sins, and especially not being grateful enough. And please don't let Father be very far away. Amen. She lay very still. The light on the water began to turn warm gold and rose. A great pine on a bluff in front of her overflowed in a crest of dark boughs against the amber splendor behind it. A part of the beauty of the beautiful world that was now slipping away from her. The chill of the evening Gulf breeze began to creep over her. Once a bit of earth broke off at her side and went down. Emily heard the thud of the little pebbles in it on the boulders below. The portion upon which one of her legs lay was quite loose and pendant also. She knew it might break off too at any moment. It would be very dreadful to be there when it got dark. She could see the big spray of farewell summer that had lured her to her doom, waving unplucked above her, wonderfully purple and lovely. And then, beside it, she saw a man's face looking down at her, and heard him say, "My God," softly to himself. She saw that he was slight, and that one shoulder was a trifle higher than the other. Well, this must be Dean Priest. Emily dared not call to him. She lay still, and her great gray purple eyes said, "Save me." "How can I help you?" said Dean Priest hoarsely, as if to himself. "I cannot reach you, and it looks as if the slightest touch or jar would send that broken earth over the brink. I must go for a rope, and to leave you here alone like this. Can you wait, child?" "Yes," breathed Emily. She smiled at him to encourage him, the little soft smile that began at the corners of her mouth and spread over her face. Dean Priest never forgot that smile, and the steadfast child eyes looking out through it from the little face that seemed so perilously near the brink. "I'll be as quick as I can," he said. "I can't go very fast. I'm a bit lame, you see. But don't be frightened. I'll save you. And I'll leave my dog here to keep you company. Here, Tweed." He whistled, and a great tawny gold dog came in sight. "Sit right there, Tweed, till I come back." Don't stir a paw and don't wag a tail. Talk to her, only with your eyes. Tweed sat down obediently, and Dean Priest disappeared. Emily lay there and dramatized the whole incident for her Jimmy book. She was a little frightened still, but not too frightened to see herself writing it all out the next day. It would be quite a thrilling bit. She liked to know the big dog was there. She was not so learned in the lore of dogs as in the lore of cats, but he looked very human and trusty, watching her with great kindly eyes. A gray kitten was an adorable thing, but a gray kitten would not have sat there and encouraged her, I believe, thought Emily, that a dog is better than a cat when you're in trouble. It was half an hour before Dean Priest returned. "Thank God you haven't gone over," he muttered. "I hadn't to go as far as I feared. I found a rope in an empty boat up shore and took it. And now, if I drop the rope down to you, are you strong enough to hold it while the earth goes, and then hang on while I pull you up?" "I'll try," said Emily. Dean Priest knotted a loop at the end and slid it down to her. Then he wound the rope around the trunk of a heavy fir. "Now," he said. Emily said inwardly, "Dear God, please." And she caught the swaying loop. The next moment, the full weight of her body swung from it, for at her first movement, the broken soil beneath her slipped down. Could she cling to the rope while he drew her up? Then Dean saw that she had got a little knee hold on the narrow shelf. Carefully he drew on the rope. Emily, full of pluck, helped him by digging her toes into the crumbling bank. In a moment, she was within his reach. He grasped her arms and pulled her up beside him into safety. As he lifted her past those farewell summer flowers, Emily reached out her hand and broke off the spray. "I've got it anyhow," she said jubilantly, and then she remembered her manners. "I'm much obliged to you. You saved my life. And I think I'll sit down a moment. My legs feel funny and trembly." Emily sat down. Dean Priest leaned against the gnarled old fir. He seemed trembly too. He wiped his forehead with his handkerchief. Emily looked curiously at him. She knew he had been to college, that he was 36 years old, which to Emily seemed a venerable age. And he was well off. He had a malformed shoulder and limped slightly. That he had only cared for books. He lived with an older brother and traveled a great deal. The whole Priest clan stood somewhat in awe of his ironic tongue. Aunt Nancy had called him a cynic. Emily didn't know what a cynic was, but it sounded interesting. She looked him over carefully and saw that he had delicate pale features and tawny brown hair. His lips were thin and sensitive, with a whimsical curve. She liked his mouth. Had she been older, she would have known why. Because it meant strength and tenderness and humor. In spite of his twisted shoulder, there was about him a certain aloof dignity of presence, which was characteristic of many of the priests, and which was often mistaken for pride. The green priest eyes that were peering and uncanny in Caroline's face and impudent in Jim Priest's were remarkably dreamy and attractive in his. His voice was beautiful, musical and caressing. Do you know who your nightly rescuer is? I think you must be Mr. Dean Priest. Emily flushed again with vexation. Now, how came you to slide over that cliff? He asked. I wanted this, said Emily, waving her farewell summer flowers. And you have it. Do you always get what you go after, even with death slipping a thin wedge between? I think you're born lucky. I see the signs. If that big aster lured you into danger, it saved you as well. For it was through stepping over to investigate it that I saw you. Its size and color caught my eye. Otherwise, I should have gone on, and you, what would have become of you? What's your name? Do you have a name? I do see you have pointed ears. Have I been tricked into meddling with fairies, and will I discover presently that 20 years have passed, and that I am an old man long since lost to the living world with nothing but the skeleton of my dog for company? I am Emily Bird Star of New Moon, said Emily rather coldly. She was beginning to be sensitive about her ears. Father Cassidy had remarked on them too, and now Dean Priest had as well. Was there really something uncanny about them? Emily then realized she had an odd feeling that she had known Dean Priest for years. Perhaps because it had seemed so long when she was lying on that crumbling earth, waiting for him to return. She liked his lean, clever face and his magnetic green eyes. So you're the young lady visitor at the Grange, said Dean Priest in some astonishment. And you are Douglas Starr's daughter. I knew your father. We were boys together at Queen's Academy. We drifted apart after we left it, and he went into journalism. I went to McGill. But he was the only friend I had at school, the only boy who would bother himself with me, the lame and hunchbacked one who couldn't play football or hockey. Emily Bird Star. You know, Star should be your first name. You look like a star. You have a radiant sort of personality shining through you. Your proper habitat should be the evening sky just after sunset, or the morning sky just before sunrise. Yes, you'd be more at home in the morning sky, I think. I shall call you Star. And if you don't mind walking a bit slowly, I'll take you back from the wilderness. So they continued to converse, and Dean Priest discovered that Emily wrote poetry. He also discovered pretty nearly everything else about her in that charming walk back to Priest Pond, in the fur-scented dusk, with Tweed walking between them, his nose touching his master's hand softly every now and then. With 9 out of 10 people, Emily was secretive and reserved. But with Dean Priest, she was able to talk freely, and with him she felt alive again. She now felt the wonderful thrill of living again after that dreadful space when she had seemed to hang between life and death. She felt, as she wrote to her father afterwards, as if a little bird was singing in my heart, and oh, how good the green sod felt under her feet. She told him all about herself and her doings and beings, and Dean Priest astutely observed her and said, "You have the itch for writing born in you. You know it's quite incurable. What are you going to do with it?" "I think I shall be either a great poetess or a distinguished novelist," said Emily reflectively. "Having only to choose," remarked Dean dryly. "Better be a novelist. I hear it pays better." "Emily, do you like staying with Aunt Nancy?" "Yes, indeed. She's very kind to me. She doesn't make me wear sunbonnets, and she lets me go barefoot in the forenoons. But I have to wear my buttoned boots in the afternoon, and I hate buttoned boots. Naturally, you should be shod with sandals of moonshine and wear a scarf of sea mist with a few fireflies caught in it over your hair. Star, you know you don't look like your father, but you do suggest him in several ways. Do you look like your mother? I never saw her." All at once, Emily smiled demurely. A real sense of humor was born in her at that moment. Never again was she to feel so unmixedly tragic over anything. "No," she said, "it's only my eyelashes and my smile that are like Mother's. I've got Father's forehead and Grandma Star's hair and eyes and Great Uncle George's nose and Aunt Nancy's hands and Cousin Susan's elbows and Great-Great-Grandmother Murray's ankles and Grandfather Murray's eyebrows." Dean Priest laughed. "A ragbag, as we all are," he said, "but your soul is your own, and fire new. I'll swear to that." "Oh, I'm so glad I like you," said Emily impulsively. "It would be hateful to think that anyone I didn't like had saved my life. I don't mind your saving it a bit." Dean Priest looked on amusedly. His strange eyes were very kindly as he met hers. "Good night, my star of the morning." He stood at the crossroad and watched her out of sight. "What a child," he muttered. "I'll never forget her eyes as she lay there on the edge of death. The dauntless little soul. And I've never seen a creature who seemed so full of sheer joy in existence. She is definitely Douglas Starr's child." In Dean Priest, Emily found for the first time since her father had died a companion who could fully sympathize. She was always at her best with him, with a delightful feeling of being understood. To love is easy and therefore common, but to understand, how rare it is. They roamed wonderlands of fancy together in the magic August days that followed upon Emily's adventure on the bay shore. They talked together of exquisite immortal things and were at home with nature's old felicities, of which Wordsworth so happily speaks. Emily showed him all the poetry and descriptions in her Jimmy book, and he read them gravely and exactly as Father had done. One day he said to her, "You make me believe in fairies, whether I will or no," he told her, "and that means youth. As long as you believe in fairies, you can't grow old." "But I can't believe in fairies myself," protested Emily sorrowfully. "I wish I could." "But you are a fairy yourself, or you wouldn't be able to find fairyland. You can't buy a ticket there, you know. Either the fairies themselves give you your passport at your christening, or they don't. That's all there is to it." "Isn't fairyland the loveliest word?" said Emily dreamily. "Because it means everything the human heart desires," said Dean. When he talked to her, Emily felt as if she were looking into some enchanted mirror where her own dreams and secret hopes were reflected back to her with added charm. If Dean Priest were a cynic, he showed no cynicism to Emily. In her company, he was not a cynic. He had shed his years and become a boy again, with a boy's untainted visions. She loved him for the world he opened to her view. There was such fun in him, too, much sly, surprising fun. He told her jokes and he made her laugh. He told her strange old tales of forgotten gods who were very beautiful, of court festivals and the bridals of kings. He seemed to have the history of the whole world at his fingers' ends. He described things to her in unforgettable phrases as they walked by the bay shore or sat in the overgrown, shadowy old garden of Wyther Grange. When he spoke of Athens as the city of the violet crown, Emily realized afresh what magic is made when the right words are wedded, and she loved to think of Rome as the city of the 7 hills. Dean had been in Rome and Athens and almost everywhere else. "I didn't know anyone ever talked as you do except in books," she told him. Dean laughed, with a little note of bitterness that was so often present in his laughter, though less often with Emily than with other people. It was really his laughter that had won Dean his reputation for cynicism. People so often felt that he was laughing at them instead of with them. "I've had only books for companions most of my life," he said. "Is it any wonder I talk like them?" "I'm sure I'll like studying history after this," said Emily. "The happiest countries, like the happiest women, have no history," said Dean. "Well, I hope I'll have a history," cried Emily. "I want a thrilling career." "We all do, foolish one. Do you know what makes history? Pain and shame and rebellion and bloodshed and heartache. Star, ask yourself how many hearts ached and broke to make those crimson and purple pages in history that you find so enthralling. I told you the story of the Leonidas and his Spartans the other day. Well, they had mothers and sisters and sweethearts. If they could have fought a bloodless battle at the poles, wouldn't it have been better, if not so dramatic? Well, I can't feel that way, said Emily confusedly. She wasn't old enough to think or say as she would say 10 years later. And like all female creatures, you form your opinions by your feelings. Well, hope for your thrilling career, but remember that if there's to be drama in your life, somebody must pay the piper in the coin of suffering. If not you, then someone else. Oh no, I wouldn't like that. Then be content with fewer thrills. What about your tumble over the bank there? That came near to a tragedy. What if I hadn't found you? But you did find me, cried Emily. I like near escapes after they're over, she added. If everybody had always been happy, there'd be nothing to read about. I like cats with one part of my mind and dogs with another part, she said. I like cats, but I never keep one, Dean said. They're too exacting. They ask too much. Dogs want only love, but cats demand worship. Kittens don't want to be worshipped, she said. They just want to be cuddled. Well, by their priestesses, yes. If you had been born on the banks of the Nile 5,000 years ago, Emily, you would have been a priestess, an adorable, slim, brown creature with a fillet of gold around your black hair and bands of silver on those ankles. Dozens of sacred little godlings frisking around you under the palms of the temple courts. Oh, gasped Emily rapturously, that gave me the flash. And she added wonderingly, just for a moment, it also made me homesick too. Why? Why? Because I haven't a doubt you were just such a priestess in a former incarnation, and my words reminded your soul of it. Dean's companionship was just what Emily needed. They would go for long walks together all over Blair Water, with Tweed woofing around them, and exploring places and roads that Emily had never seen before. They watched a young moon grow old, night by night. They talked in dim-scented chambers of twilight, over long red roads of mystery. They followed the lure of hill winds. They saw the stars rise, and Dean told her all about them, the great constellations of the old myths. So the days continued on with Emily enjoying her time at Wyther Grange, until all of a sudden it came to an end. "Go home, Emily, I'm tired of you," said Aunt Nancy. "I like you very well, and you've behaved exceedingly well. Tell Elizabeth you do the Murrays credit, but I'm tired. Go home." Emily's feelings were mixed. It hurt her to be told Aunt Nancy was tired of her. It would hurt anyone. It rankled in her for several days until she thought of a sharp answer she might have made. She wrote it down in her Jimmy book. She felt quite relieved then, as if she'd really said it. And she was sorry to leave Wyther Grange. She had grown to love the old beautiful house, with its flavor of hidden secrets. A flavor that was wholly a trick of its architecture, for there had never been anything in it but the simple tale of births and deaths and marriages and everyday living that most houses have. She was sorry to leave the bay shore and the quaint garden and the gazing ball. And most of all, she was sorry to leave Dean Priest. But on the other hand, it was delightful to think of going back to New Moon and the fairy world of the Midsummer Night's Dream. Cousin Jimmy's garden would be in its prime of splendor. The August apples would be ripe. Suddenly, Emily was very ready to go. She packed her little black box jubilantly and found it an excellent chance to work in neatly a certain line from a poem Dean had recently read to her, which had captured her fancy. "Goodbye, proud world, I'm going home." And then Cousin Jimmy came over for Emily, and how glad she was to see his kind face with its gentle elfish eyes and forked beard again. But she still felt very badly when she turned to Dean, and he said, "Star of the morning, I'm sorry you're going, but I'll see you again before long. In the meantime, remember, you have promised to write me every week, and I'll write you." "Nice fat letters," coaxed Emily. "I love fat letters." "Fat they'll be, positively. Now, Star, I'm not even going to say goodbye. Let's make a pact. We'll never say goodbye to each other. We'll just smile and go." Emily made a gallant effort and smiled and went, and Dean Priest whistled for Tweed and went to the bay shore. He was so lonely that he laughed at himself. Emily and Cousin Jimmy had so much to talk of that the drive home seemed very short. New moon was white in the evening sunshine, which also lay with exciting mellowness on the gray old barns. The three princesses, shooting up against the silvery sky, were as remote and princessly as ever. The old gulf was singing away down over the fields. Aunt Laura came running out to meet them, her lovely blue eyes shining with pleasure. Aunt Elizabeth was in the cookhouse preparing supper, and she was making Emily's favorite cream puffs for dessert. Ilse came swooping over, and Emily discovered she'd forgotten how vivid Ilse was, how brilliant her amber eyes, how golden her mane of spun silk hair. She engulfed Emily in a rapturous hug. "I think Emily has grown taller since she went to Wyther Grange," Aunt Laura said, looking at her rather wistfully. "She looks different." Laura was right. Emily had grown taller and older in soul, if not in body. It was this change which Laura felt, as close and tender affection swiftly feels. The Emily who returned from Wyther Grange was not the Emily who had gone there. She was no longer wholly the child. That terrible hour when she had lain cheek by jowl with death on the cliffs of the bay shore, her association with Dean Priest had all combined to mature her in intelligence and emotions. She sat down that evening to write a poem on returning home after weeks' absence. It was really good to be home again. There is no place just like dear New Moon, thought Emily. And then Aunt Elizabeth and Laura informed Emily that she was now to have her mother's room, the lookout room where she could look out over the front door to the garden. "All to myself?" exclaimed Emily. "Yes, and it has never been slept in since the night before your mother went away," said Aunt Laura. Emily went up the stairs and settled into her mother's old room and gazed about her with keen and thrilling interest. She could not get into bed until she had explored every bit of it. The room was very old-fashioned, like all the New Moon rooms. The walls were papered with a design of slender gilt diamonds enclosing golden stars. On the little mantel were vases full of dried and colored grasses, and a fascinating pot-bellied bottle filled with West Indian shells. On either side were lovable little cupboards with leaded glass doors, like those in the sitting room. Underneath was a small fireplace. "I wonder if Aunt Elizabeth will ever let me have a little fire here," thought Emily. The room was full of that indefinable charm found in all rooms where the pieces of furniture, whether old or new, are well acquainted with each other, and the walls and floors are on good terms. Emily felt it all over her as she flitted about, examining everything. This was her room, and she loved it already. She felt perfectly at home. I belong here. She breathed happily. Here she felt deliciously near to her mother, as if Juliet's star had suddenly become real to her. It thrilled her to think that her mother had probably crocheted the lace cover on the round pincushion on the table, and that fat black jar of potpourri on the mantel. Her mother must have compounded it. When Emily lifted the lid, a faint, spicy odor floated out. The souls of all the roses that had bloomed through many olden summers at new moon seemed to be prisoned there in a sort of flower purgatory. Something in the haunting, mystical, elusive odor gave Emily the flash, and her room had received its consecration. There was a picture of her mother hanging over the mantel, taken when she was a little girl. Emily looked at it lovingly. This picture of the golden-haired, rose-cheeked girl was now all her own. She could look at it and talk to it at will. Oh, Mother, what did you think of when you were a little girl here like me? I wish I could have known you then. And to think nobody has ever slept here since that last night that you did before you ran away with Father. Aunt Elizabeth says you were wicked to do it, but I don't think you were. It wasn't as if you were running away with a stranger. Anyway, I'm glad you did, because if you hadn't, there wouldn't have been any me. Emily was very glad that there was an Emily. She opened her lookout window as high as it would go, got into bed, and drifted to sleep, feeling a happiness that was so deep as to be almost pain as she listened to the sonorous sweep of the night wind among the great trees in lofty John's bush. When she wrote to her father a few days later, she began the letter, "Dear Father," and then added, "Mother." And now I'll always write the letter to you, Father, and to Mother. I'm sorry I left you out so long, but you didn't seem real till that night that I came home. I made the bed beautifully next morning. Aunt Elizabeth didn't find a bit of fault with it, and I dusted everything. I like to go to bed early now, and I love to lie all alone in my room and make poetry and think out descriptions of things while I look through the open window at the stars and the nice, big, kind, quiet trees in lofty John's bush. Oh, Father and Mother, I'm glad to be home, but I miss Dean and the gazing ball. I had a letter from him today. He writes lovely letters and he sends me poems, and I feel so grown up receiving them. Anyway, it's time to say goodnight, dear Mother and Father. Your lovingest daughter, Emily. One evening at sunset, Emily sat in the lookout room. It was flooded with soft splendor. Outside in sky and trees were delicate tintings and aerial sounds. Down in the garden, Daffy was chasing dead leaves along the red walks. The sight of his sleek striped sides, the grace of his movements gave her pleasure, as did the beautiful, even glossy furrows of the plowed fields beyond the lane, and the first faint white star in the crystal green sky. The wind of the autumn night was blowing trumpets of fairyland on the hills, and over in lofty John's bush was laughter, like the laughter of fawns. Emily was so full of rapture that she must write it out before she went back from her world of dreams into the world of reality. On the table lay before her a brand new book. She pulled it towards her, took up her pen, and on its page she wrote, "This is my diary, and when I die, I want it to be published. Emily Bird Star, New Moon of Blair Water, Prince Edward Island, October 8th. And when she finished, she settled into her bed, breathed in the fragrance from that mystical potpourri on the mantel, looked all around her mother's cozy room, and with a well-contented smile on her lips, Emily soon fell fast asleep. And that's the end of our story of Emily of New Moon. Thanks for listening, and I wish you sweet dreams and good night.